Welcome to Financially Speaking. I'm Sean Latter. Now, as the 1st of July sees the beginning of National Savings Month, we take the opportunity to bring the country's savings culture under the spotlight. Of course, the recent recession, marred by business foreclosures and retrenchments, has left many South Africans counting the cost of such an economic event. Whether it's a financial crisis such as this or just inflated lifestyles, one thing is certain: South Africa, like many other countries, has somewhat of a savings crisis. Joining me in studio to discuss this topic and what it may mean for your financial health is Raylan Dunbar, financial advisor at FinLogic, consumer credit specialist Stephen Logan, and Wilhelm Janssen van Vuren, wealth manager at FNB. Before we jump into our discussion though, let's take a quick look at our viewer's question for this week. It comes from Tom, and Tom asks, what percentage of my income should I be saving? Now, firstly, to the guests, good evening and welcome to the studio. I'm certainly looking forward to the discussion that we are going to have tonight. I think a question like this, we're really jumping straight into the thick of it. Stephen, I'd like to start with you. What would your advice be to Tom here?
Well, generally speaking, the best thing to do is to save as much money as you possibly can. There's no ideal percentage. You can, of course, try and thumbsuck a percentage like 20% or 10%. But if you're in the position that you can actually save more, then you ought to be doing that. Those percentages that people bandy about are really just guidelines. And ideally, you should be saving at least 10% of your income.
Okay, at least 10%. I think, you know, the reality is a lot of people start out with the best of intentions. They get their first salary or even their first year's salary. They do pretty well. Then life tends to take it over.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's one of the big challenges is that, you know, you get involved in your first sort of career move. You be employed somewhere, and then suddenly you get an increase in terms of your revenue or your income. And the first thing you normally do, instead of saving a bit more, you tend to go and buy that nice motor car, or maybe you nice clothes, or whatever the case may be. And that's where the discipline needs to come in. As to add to what he's just said, is that there's no sort of a fixed number that you can actually use. It's an individual sort of situation, and you have to plan properly and be disciplined over a long period, and that's where the challenge comes in.
Right, and of course, you know, Wilhelm spoke about discipline, and I guess for the most part, why we save is for a number of reasons, and one of them, I guess, is planning for retirement and making sure we can maintain some form of lifestyle. But when dealing with clients, what is it that you generally look at?
Well, first of all, a person needs to set up a goal of what they really want. Yes, always retirement planning comes into the equation, but people also need to think about saving for the shorter term events. For example, setting up an emergency fund. You should have at least 3 to 6 months worth of your income saved up that you have immediate access to. In the situation where a person is now possibly being retrenched or taking a drop in income or not getting a salary increase, or suddenly the interest rates go up, they're now in a position where they've got the cash that they can actually help to get themselves through that situation. And by having the finances in place correctly, that actually allows a person a lot more leverage when it comes to these kind of life-changing events without taking on all that extra stress plus financial strain as well. So the idea really in terms of planning is really to sit with an individual and look at their short-term, their medium-term and their long-term planning. I mean, things like education, for example, should come into play for people that have children. Some people might be considering buying a house at a later stage. Start saving now for it. Put yourself in a position that you're used to putting away that monthly bond repayments, and you can build up a very nice deposit, which actually can help you offset a huge amount of interest when you're actually buying that house. So there's a few things that need to be taken into consideration, and people really need to find the right product with their financial advisors to be able to get the best tax deductions and obviously be able to get the best investments and returns.
Well, Halab, obviously, I mean, financial planning and financial advice plays or should play a very key role in how people save and invest. Yet, you know, as a profession, it's widely seen as untrustworthy in certain ways. What do you think is being done to perhaps remedy this?
You know, especially what happened over the last, since 2008, I think a lot of people, as you've rightly said, trust is a big issue. A lot of regulatory issues, bodies and institutions are doing their best to sort of to regain the trust from the investors and the individuals. But I mean, it's an ongoing thing. I think the sort of investment environment and advice environment has changed from the FSB side, you know, from all the different, from within our banking environment as well. So it's a challenge to get to the right advisor. I mean, you know, by word of mouth. I mean, there's a lot of different options available, but it is, I think, to be fair to the advisors and to the banking environment. I mean, they are doing a lot. But it's going to take some time to regain the trust, as I've said.
Sure.
But it's an ongoing thing. I mean, just to add, I mean, in terms of your long-term plan and the different issues that we've addressed in terms of tax, retirement planning, there's no sort of one plan. I mean, it's an ongoing thing. It has to be addressed on an ongoing basis because things do change. And I always say the future will surprise. You know, you have to plan for that and you have to be prepared for that as well.
Absolutely. Stephen, from your perspective, I mean, we touched just now as well on the trustworthy, whatever, but Willem spoke about discipline just now. And I think, you know, regardless of what advice we seek, regardless of what products we end up buying, at the end of the day, it's going to come to a discipline thing. And I think one of the things that's lacking is perhaps education. What are your thoughts on that?
We find when dealing with clients that most of our clients end up in a financial distress because they've overspent. They thought that they could afford something that they really couldn't. And there is huge pressure on people to go and live as if they were millionaires or far more wealthy than they really are, to show a lifestyle or to have a particular lifestyle. And it's really something that needs to change at the very lowest level of education. Right from primary school, one should be teaching that actually it's not so much what you have as how you use what you have that really counts. And this huge pressure to have a particular image and to come across in a particular way is part of our materialist society. And we really do need to have some moral leaders who actually go out there and say, you don't need to have this flashy car and live in that particular area. We must get away as a society from asking people the first questions that we are famously known for asking: where do you live and what car do you drive?
Sure.
You know, that sort of thing is just counterproductive. As soon as people are making prudent decisions based on reality that they find themselves in, they will be able to plan properly and try not to have the aspirations that are just not in tune with their own reality. So I think that education needs to focus on trying to work out what you can actually afford and trying to get these basic skills across to children so that they understand that if they choose a particular profession, they're less likely to have all the things that they would otherwise have if they were a specialist in some high net worth kind of profession.
And I guess, of course, you know, the parents, the first thing they need to teach your kids is to be as a role model and spend in the right way. But, I mean, once again, we come back to it, and I talk about education perhaps very broadly, but, I mean, I've come across many people who are highly, highly intelligent, highly educated, yet are doing what they believe is right, but getting it all wrong. Roland, I mean, when you're sitting with clients, again, that role of education has to become key as part of the process.
It really does. You know, the problem as well comes in where obviously the banks are also trying to get a lot more debt into the market, and especially if a person is financially viable to take on that extra debt, they really try and encourage you to take out a bond far beyond your means. And as is already Stephen's mentioned, what generally happens is that right now, for example, the interest rates are very low. So what happens is a person is taking out a bond at the maximum amount that they can afford at the moment. Now, the interest rates are definitely going to be going up going forward. It's just really a matter of time. We have to start paying back those surpluses that have been injected into the economy. And with that coming into play, inflation is going to go up, and so is the interest rates. And with that happening, people are going to be stuck in a position, if they're buying now at the very low rates, where they possibly are going to be out of pocket going forward. And as Stephen's already alluded to, you need to be in a position where you're actually taking responsibility for your own finances. People very often don't budget, and I think that's the biggest concern. They don't sit down and work out the exact monthly finances. I mean, if you had to ask somebody how much they really spend per month on something, they generally don't know. They've got to go and try and consult a bank statement, or they're not too sure about half the debit orders going off their accounts. So the idea really is that when I sit with an individual, I like to go through everything with them to make sure that they're understanding that they're not paying too much in bank charges, that they're living well within their own means, and that they have still got cash available to save, and they have got money available for those emergency events.
And I mean, certainly from that point of view, I mean, the other challenge, I guess, that comes into it, once you've done the budgeting, I've always said that a budget should never be about denying yourself something, but rather making sure that your money is being spent on the best possible area that's the most important to you. And I think that's a good starting point. I mean, from there we can start looking at where to save and how to save and the like. I think sort of moving on a little bit to say, well, we need a budget. We need to understand what we can spend, what we can potentially save. We then take the next step and start saying, where do we invest this money? Now, again, the financial services industry, sort of by and large, has come under a lot of pressure with the costs related to products. And once again, I mean, Wilhelm, this sort of fits into your realm again. We've seen some changes. It is improving. Is it where it needs to be right now?
You know, like anything, fees are important, or like any investment sort of environment, fees are important, but that's not necessarily the most important factor in your investment decision. I mean, sometimes if you pay a little bit more for better advice, it might make sense, and one needs to understand that. If you don't pay for something, and that's also fortunately changed, because nothing is for free. Sometimes everybody, sometimes the advisors are not 100% transparent about all the different levels of fees, but that is important, definitely so. So you have to shop around, and I want to add to what Roland has said. You have to be very disciplined, and you have to have a proper budget in place. And I think from our side as well, from F&B Private Clients, if I could maybe just say, getting back to the bank sort of banking environment, I think in a sense it's still true where the banks, I mean, obviously we all know a bank wants to do finance, they want to give you a bond, and they want to give you facilities. But I think we're trying to give advice and to be balanced in our approach going, in terms of what we're doing for clients. And because we all know the first sort of option would be to settle your debt as soon as possible, because that's a good investment. It's a sound investment, and nowadays you have access bonds and facilities available. If something unforeseen happens, you always have access to those funds. But it's a combination of factors that you need to take into consideration, and and also looking at in terms of the employed people who have defined contribution funds and individuals. You need to, or people who's self-employed, you need to also plan and say, listen, the guy with, look at the retirement fund as well as your discretionary funds outside of pension funds. So it's really, I think, holistic planning and integral, the whole approach is very important to make sure that all the avenues are addressed, and that you sort of address everything that's important in an individual's sort of personal portfolio.
So at the end of the day, whatever decisions you make has to fall in within an overall plan. I think the key there as well, especially when it comes to costs. I think it was Warren Buffett who said, price is what you pay and value is what you buy. And I think it's key for people to understand what the costs are primarily, and then just to see what value they are getting out of it, because in many instances I believe there is value, in some instances not.